Welcome back, future people. Now, there are, of course, very many differences between your world and mine of 2,500 years ago. I mean, one really would hope that in at least certain small respects, humanity might have made a few improvements along the way, even if people do remain people, even if they are still afflicted by what I've referred to before as this human thing. Take, for example, as one significant difference, today's topic, the World Health Organization, an international body for improving the health of everybody as far as possible, for taking the brilliant insights of my contemporaries, Hippocrates and his followers, and understanding that medicine is not a mystical invention, and understanding that the sufferings of people are not the punishments of the gods, they are natural events with natural causes that can be understood and tackled, and to spread this knowledge to all peoples. It's actually rather a good idea, if I, have to acknowledge that. Now, there are people who would say that nothing at all like this, no sort of international organisation could possibly have existed in my time. Indeed, there are people for whom this seems like rather a good idea. They celebrate it. They read my famous account of the dialogue between the Athenians and the Melians as a positive account of the world. They look at the Athenians claiming that there are no restrictions on their actions other than power, that the strong can do what they want, the weak just have to suck it up. And rather than seeing these, as I intended, the words of a bunch of arrogant psychopaths who've rather got carried away, they think this is a jolly good idea, that ancient Greece was basically completely anarchic, and wouldn't it be so much better if today was completely anarchic and they could just exercise their strength. And obviously, the absence of any sort of constraints, any sort of international norms of behaviour or values is, again, taken to be a positive thing. But leaving aside the fact that these people are clearly psychopaths, it's not entirely true. There were what we would refer to as pan-Hellenic institutions and values. We Greeks did indeed spend most of our time fighting one another, but we could come together to fight somebody else. And, in fact, we could come together for entirely peaceful means. Think of the Olympic Games, for example, something which I may perhaps need to discuss in a future episode. Or think of the sanctuary at Delphi, the one place to which all Greeks would look for authoritative statements, for ideas and advice that they could believe without question. Indeed, if you were suffering from a plague or some other trouble, Delphi is where you would turn for answers. And inevitably, somewhere so important becomes a focus for controversy, something which people seek to control, something which people seek to manipulate, and of course, if the message out of Delphi isn't what you want to hear, if it seems to benefit one of your enemies instead, then of course you denounce it in the most furious terms and claim that you're never going to pay any attention to it, and obviously they're biased and so forth, which is very much what's happening with your World Health Organization today. Because it matters, people are very determined to claim that it doesn't. Now, the quality of the advice from Delphi was, I would have to say, occasionally rather suspect. Now, I personally express no opinion as to whether these were actually the words of the god, but what was always most striking was the consequences of people believing that they were. But the problem with all advice, it has to be interpreted. You have to think about how best to make sense of it. And people really were far too willing to leap to conclusions, far too willing to focus on the interpretation that suited their priors, and then blame Delphi or the gods or somebody else when it all went wrong. Obviously, in my view, you need the best advice possible. You don't just trust it because of its authoritative source, but it's certainly better to have an authoritative source than just to make it up as you go along, as it suits you. So, no institution, not even the World Health Organization, can be considered free of flaws. They do indeed get taken over, manipulated, bribed, because they are important. But where you need to pay most attention is not what this organization is struggling to do, but it's the way in which its advice may be rejected or misinterpreted, because that is where the most dire consequences are likely to develop.